Take a breath. Alrighty. Welcome to the April Austin Writers Roulette. Our theme today is Pretense is Underrated, and more special is the fact that it's the 25th celebration of the Austin International Poetry Festival. I am so thrilled to be a part of this. So it's absolutely awesome. And before I forget, because I am middle-aged, since it is Poetry Month, and we are in a bookstore, all poetry is 20% off. So if you haven't looked around the bookstore, I think, oh, look at there, convenient sign. I don't even have to, all you have to do is know how to read signs. Poetry along this wall. And also, because of our theme, we have books over here. There used to be 2 books that had the word pretense in it, but because they set up the display, one was sold. And I thought, man, that is the power of displays there. So, some things to look at during our 10-minute intermission. All right, so our first roulette shows us that sometimes pretending everything is okay makes it easier to survive the unacceptable. Please welcome Donna, Dechen, Birdwell.
Yay, Donna!
So this is from a novel in process called The Fourth Time. And the protagonist of this story is Meg Fitzellen, who is an archaeologist employed at Southeast Texas State University. My parents want to know if we're coming home for Thanksgiving, I said one Saturday morning in mid-November. I'd air quoted the word home. My husband Seth and I were sitting at our computers in our shared study. I felt him wince. The little West Texas town of Charco Seco hadn't felt like home to me in a long time, but it was where I'd grown up, and it was where my parents still lived, right next door to my brother, Bart Jr., and his wife and 3 kids, and just a stone's throw from Fitzellen Furniture, the store the family had owned for 2 generations, now going on 3, with a 4th generation in waiting. Of course we'd go. We always went for Thanksgiving. Over the next couple of weeks in the lead up to our cross-state journey, I found myself thinking about our last trip to Charco Seco, and especially what had happened when Mom and I were sitting on the back porch one evening, shucking corn for supper. We got to talking about some memories from my early childhood. Do you remember my little calico cat? What was his name? Charlie. I laughed and then grew suddenly somber. Did you know that one day I got mad and threw Charlie in the wading pool? Mom looked at me then as if she were someplace else, far away, and her face clouded with an unexpected, somber sadness. She set down the bucket of shucked corn and started picking stray silks from her skirt. I knew, she said. Your childhood wasn't always the easiest, and I guess you had some anger in you. I'm not sure your dad ever forgave you for naming your cat that. I didn't know at the time. I was just a kid. 5 years old when we got Charlie? How was I to know it was a name that Dad associated with the Viet Cong? Your anger was nothing compared to your dad's. She still had that faraway look. Her voice had gone quieter, more intimate. It was so hard being with him when he first came back. I thought having a child would help things, you know, having a family to feel good about, a future. And I thought having a boy would please him no end. But when your brother Bart Jr. was born in '76, your dad just closed up like a clam. It wasn't till years later I understood why. Mom's eyes filled with tears as I waited for her to continue. She took a couple of deep breaths and fiddled with her wedding ring. Of course, I never talked about it with you kids, but I guess you're not exactly a kid anymore. I'm sure you knew your dad must have seen things over there, over in Minham. I know you studied about it in school. At first, he didn't want to tell me about anything. But I finally said, how can I know what you're dealing with if you never tell me anything? So bit by bit, he did tell me. Oh, Maggie, nobody should ever have to do that kind of thing to another human being, especially to little children. He says he never killed a child, and I believe him. And he never fathered one over there either. But what did happen is this. He had a woman, and the woman had a little boy. Bart didn't just go to the woman for, but more for company, though I'm sure. Anyway, he got real tight with that little boy. As the war wound down, the woman got caught up in something, and she was killed. Bart says it was all a bad misunderstanding, but he was determined to help that boy. So after lots of talk and finagling, he got the boy a spot on a plane that was fixing to bring a whole bunch of Vietnamese orphans to America. Bart meant to bring that boy home with him, meant to raise him up here in Charco Seco with me. And I'm sure I would have been fine with that. But Mom stopped then, a strangled sob choking her words. The plane crashed. More than 140 people dead, most of them just little kids. She wiped her eyes on her sleeve. I reached out and put my hand over hers. Oh my God, Mom, I never knew. No wonder he was always so hard with us, especially Bart Jr. I thought about Rick's stories from Iraq. I'd been engaged to Rick back in graduate school. But Mom's pain seemed enough, and I didn't want to add to it. Another time we could talk. Apparently we have a lot in common, Mom and I. A lot to talk about. And I had work to do. The lab analysis of the artifacts we brought back from Belize was going well. I'd performed all the precise measurements on the little skull, a child's skull, and on the turtle shells. I'd even done digital overlays of photographs of all the punctures, and everything pointed to the same conclusion. It was the same jaguar that had killed all of them. But which had happened first? Did it matter? I replayed the scenario I'd come up with in the field and found that it still fit. But I couldn't shake the idea that the child's fatal encounter with the great cat hadn't been an accident, that it was some sort of ritual gone wrong. The idea that the child could have been some kind of sacrifice was disturbing. It made me think about how children get caught up in grown-up things where they should have no place. Things like ritual practices and war, especially war. Our annual Thanksgiving trip to the old hometown went as well as could be expected. On the Sunday morning, Mom invited my best friend, Dory Mendez, over for breakfast. After Dory left, the men all went into the living room to watch football, and I went to the kitchen to help Mom with the dishes. But first I gave her a quick hug and thanked her for inviting Dory. You girls were always so tight, even when you were little. Dory was your first real friend, and I have to say, I was real happy when you finally had an actual flesh and blood friend instead of all those imaginary playmates. Why do you suppose I created those pretend friends? I picked up the dishcloth to dry the plates and glasses. Some kids just do that. But with you, I think it gave you somewhere you could go to when things got too tense with your dad. She paused, wiping a plate in careful circles as she thought. He got better after a while, but he used to have such awful dreams, and they'd put him in a state for days afterwards. Really? Dad had vivid dreams? I never knew that. I always tried to tell him that dreams are just stories we tell ourselves, but I guess I knew his dreams were more than that. They were things that really happened, things he didn't like and couldn't forget. I hesitated only for a moment. You know, my fiance Rick had those kind of dreams too. I expect they were a lot like Dad's dreams. I think they may have had a lot of the same kinds of war experiences. I glanced up at Mom, unsure whether I wanted to continue. She gave me that raised eyebrow thing that said, yes, this was something I ought to tell her about. So I told her some of the stories Rick had told me. Not the ones about Abu Ghraib, but some of the things that had happened when he was downrange. I told her about how he'd been involved in an operation where one soldier in his unit had mowed down a couple of kids, insisting they were planting IEDs. Mom's head dropped to her chest and her shoulders hunched up. When she looked at me, her face was contorted with pain and tears. "Oh, Maggie, I had no idea," she said. "Why do we do this to our boys? Why do we keep doing it? You know, sometimes I think my own son feels guilty, less a man somehow because he never went to war. But I never wanted him to go. You remember when he had that car wreck that nearly cut off his left hand? I prayed to God that night, Meg, thanking him for sparing my boy's life, but thanking him too for making him unfit to be a soldier." I put down my towel and hugged her hard. In that moment, clinging to one another, we understood each other in a new way, understood what each of us had dealt with in our own time, each in our own awkward way, and wasn't it the same thing? There was a unison shout from the living room as somebody made a touchdown.